Good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, whatever it is for you right now. My name is Brian Rania, and I am the sole developer on a game called Undergrowth. Just a quick note of where I am in development. My first big milestone is coming up in March 2022, at which point I intend to have a fully fleshed out combat demo. And hopefully be able to share that with the public, assuming it's up to my standards. Today, I want to show you the latest monster that I'm adding to the game. We'll start out with conceptual design, then move through sprite creation, and then finally we'll take a look at some animation. All right, so before designing, I had to think about a few things. Primarily, what will this enemy be? It's important to keep in mind that all the monsters in this game are like a parallel kingdom of animals. Or they're not even animals. They're like a parallel kingdom of organisms to animals. So they're not animals, but they're sort of like animals, but they don't share a common ancestor at the kingdom level. So as for their origins, that's a plot point that I won't reveal here. I will just say that they're not aliens. So with that in mind, I had a few things in mind preconceived before beginning the formal design process of the enemy. Those things are the enemy is going to be large compared to the player. It's going to be a big enemy. It will be introduced as a boss fight, but it will be used later as a normal enemy. You see this a lot in games. I really like this. I really like when they do that with with like prominent enemies. They present it as a boss, and then you see it later. It pops up. It's like, oh, that was a boss before. Now I'm just fighting it like normal. So that's always fun. Another benefit of that sort of presentation is it gives you a chance to learn in isolation how to fight the enemy. I know that it's going to have a serpentine body, and it's going to dig through the ground. I know that I'm going to name it Rootworm, and that the lore behind the beast is that it feeds on roots, and it kills out entire groves of trees, and then like moves on to the next grove once it's completely destroyed all the trees in one grove. So not with all those points in mind, I was ready to begin the formal design process. So in the first formal step of creating this monster, we've got the concept art, which is just some sketches by me. Looking at these sketches, you can see that I started out with a cyclopsian eye and a bird beak, and I thought he looked pretty interesting like this. And the smile that the beak give a bit of character, but it felt like he seemed a little too personable of a monster, especially for this monster. These things, in my mind, are supposed to be like revolting, and you're going to be brutally killing them. So I needed a look that was a bit more disgusting and a bit less personable. So I went with this like worm-like mouth with these grotesque twisted teeth. I thought that that suited the purpose a lot better. With the design in place, it was time to move on to creating the sprites. Since I use a paper doll or bone and joint animation system, all of the segments, all of the pieces and body parts of the sprite will have to be separated out into individual images. So I'm starting out here with an outline, a whole outline, but then when I go to do the color, I'll render all the different pieces of the body separately from each other. They'll look like they're one piece, but they'll all be on separate layers so that I can separate them out later on. So I'll start out by outlining the overall form of the character. I include the player for scale. It's important to get the scale right. Since we're working with pixel art, we don't want to be rescaling at runtime. Then, you have different pixel densities for different characters. You don't want that. All right, and I've got the whole body pretty much drawn out here. You can see this line represents the ground, and in his idle pose, the bottom part of his body will be underground. I decided to give him these two little like mandible thingies that you see on earwigs, because I always thought those looked kind of creepy, so I thought that would be cool to include. And he will have 4 arms, but I only drew out one because I can just copy paste later. All right, from here I'm ready to start adding color. I use the head body part to experiment with different color palettes, and I decided on this purple and yellow palette here. Now the face is the focal point, so it should have the most contrast. So I included a lot of bright yellows, and I had sort of this like lit from within effect on the mouth to make his mouth features kind of pop. With the palette chosen, it's time to move on to rendering the rest of the body. I do my best to estimate how the overlapping shapes of the body parts should be laid out for animation, but I don't stress over it too much just because it's an easy process to go back and fix it once the sprite has been rigged up. Next, I'll create eyelid sprites so he can blink. And separate the pupil from the eye so that he can look around. Next, I'll cut the inside of the mouth out so I can display it as a background rather than being part of a single image. And then I'll separate the jaw so that he can move the jaw around. All right, he's now in good enough shape to start rigging. I will undoubtedly need to come back and create different versions of each of these body parts, depending on the animations that I'm making. For example, I'll probably want a forward-facing version of the head. Right now, the head is kind of turned at a 3/4 view, but I'll want different angles of that head so I can do different animations, such as like a turnaround animation. But for now, I'll get it rigged up and start animating, and we'll see which of those different sprite versions I'll need, and I'll create those as I go. All right, time to start the rigging. The process of rigging is admittedly a very tedious one, but it's a welcome change after all the creative energy that's needed to actually conceptualize and then illustrate the monster. Sometimes it's nice to just be able to turn your brain off and just like do for a little while. Like, turn on some music and just put your head down and just go for it without having to think too much. All right, for the first step of rigging, I need to save every single piece of the rootworm to a separate image file. And then I'll open up the animation software, the one I use is Spine, and I'll place the whole picture down as a guide. Then I'll use that picture as a guide to start placing the bones. It's important that I name these correctly so that when I'm animating later on, I can quickly find the bone that I'm looking for. All right, what are these called? Oh, Cersei. All right, so all our bones are laid out. Now the final step in rigging is attaching the images to the bones, the actual individual body parts. I'll again use the background image as a reference to get the placement right, and I will have to adjust where the bones are a little bit to make sure that the joints are moving correctly. All right, now for the fun part, animating. So just a quick design change to note. Right before I started animating, I changed his pupil a little bit. It used to be a dark pupil. I made it a white pupil. I thought it made him a little more menacing and make him a little less confused. Let's start with an idle animation. Okay, so I'll start by creating 2 keyframes. One where he's like compressed and one where he's stretched out. And then I will animate between those 2 keyframes, and we have a basic animation that kind of looks like this. Now, if I were an animator on, say, Pokemon Coliseum, I'd be done here. But I'm not, so we have a lot more to do on this animation. So to ensure that our lovely worm doesn't have Coliseum syndrome, we'll add a curve to his animation. Curves are essentially a way to deviate the speed of the transition of direction of the bones. Basically, it makes the transition between keyframes look a lot smoother. Now we're going to start doing some offsetting. Essentially what offsetting is, it's changing where the keyframes are in relation to the timeline. So I'm basically taking one or multiple bones and offsetting them so that they begin and end at a different point in the animation loop. Okay, looking pretty good so far. Let's do something with the fingers. I kind of want him to have like these like rippling kind of fingers to show that he just wants to grab you and eat you. So I'm adding some variation to the fingers, and I'm again going to use offset to kind of give that wave feel to the way he's waggling his fingers. Let's add some eye movement just for fun. We did rig up the eye so we can move it around. So I just want to show that even though in actual practice, I will probably be handling those eye animations in a different animation entirely and then combining it later on. This is so that the eye movement doesn't have to be dependent on the base animation that happens to be playing at the time. So he'll be able to do all different sorts of eye movements while still holding the same idle animation or whatever animation that may be playing at the time. Oh, right. And I haven't animated the jaw at all. I worked hard on making sure that was mobile. So let's put some movement into that. I'll add separate keyframes for translation and rotation so that the jaw looks a little bit wobbly. And there you have it, our first animation for the Rootworm. It's the idle animation, and it looks pretty good. Keep in mind, this is not the final version of the animation. I will be adding some like twitchy movements, but I think I might handle that in a separate animation, just like the eye. But we'll see. Thank you so much for watching. That's all I've got for part 1. I will have a part 2 coming up in the near future, hopefully, once I get the enemy in the game and you're able to fight him. So there's a lot of programming I have to do specifically. Grizz, did you fart? God, this smells horrible. This enemy is kind of different than the enemies I've created so far. The ones so far only have 1 hitbox, and they don't have all these like moving parts that all are going to need probably separate hitboxes, at least some of them. Obviously, you know, this guy, he's very big compared to the player. He's not going to be able to have just 1 box, because as far as his hitbox, because he's going to be able to like go vertical, horizontal, like all sorts of different body shapes that he could take. So and I do want to have like I want to experiment with maybe like a weak point in the eye, or maybe you can chop the arms off, or who knows. So this is going to kind of throw a wrench in a lot of systems that I've made for the AI, but it should be an interesting challenge, and I'm excited to get it in there. So make sure you subscribe if you want to see part 2. Also, if you made it this far in the video, you either are a masochist or you enjoyed it. So hit me with a like if you are so inclined. Grizzy, come here. Grizzy, come here. I need to beg for likes with your cuteness. Come here. Look. Come here. Grizzy. Look. 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 Oh, stinkers. Turn around. Oh. What are you doing? Come here. Come here. Look how cute. Look how cute you are. Please like and subscribe. You're so silly. All right, where's the other one? All right, everyone. Thanks for watching. See you next time.